Picture this, a land so vast it dwarfs Texas, California, and Montana put together. Over 660,000 square miles of mountains, ice, and wilderness. In fact, you could pack 20 Floridas into its grip or let 8 million New Yorkers scatter across it, and they'd still be lost in the dark. This is Alaska, America's biggest state. But here's the thing. It's home to fewer people than San Francisco, less than 750,000 souls in all that space. That makes it the emptiest state in the nation. And America's emptiest state isn't just quiet, it's watching. Look closer. Mountains loom like jagged teeth. Tundra sprawls out, endless and cold, hiding who knows what beneath. Snow buries peaks that scrape the sky. Coastal cliffs drop into a sea that freezes solid. It's breathtaking, sure, but it's also lonely. A lone cabin sits miles from anywhere. A frozen river cuts through silence. This isn't just big. It's a place that feels untouched, forgotten, forbidden, abandoned almost. It's perched up there, far northwest, teetering on the Arctic Circle, staring across at Russia through a foggy veil. This isn't just remote, it's cut off, like something wants it that way. And that's the mystery. Alaska's got room for millions, but barely anyone's here. And that's where it gets strange. All that space, room for 150 California's worth of people, yet it stays hollow. What's keeping it so empty? Is it the cold, the dark, something else? What's hiding in all that emptiness? Something keeping people away? Or something waiting to be found? From the outside, it's a puzzle. A giant state with a tiny heartbeat. So let's step into it, past the postcard views, beyond the myths. What's really going on in America's emptiest state? Why does it feel so vast, so quiet, so hidden? Stick with us because we're about to find out. Before we begin, like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content like this. Let's begin. The untamed land. Alaska's more than just a big state. It's a force of nature. Covering 660,000 square miles, it's a landscape that shapes everything about it. Mountains tower high. The Alaska Range alone stretches over 400 miles, with peaks like Denali topping out at 20,000 feet. Then there's the tundra, vast open plains that roll out for miles, dotted with lakes and low shrubs. This is a place built on a scale that's hard to wrap your head around. Climate plays a huge role. Winters here are long and harsh. Temperatures can drop to -50 Fahrenheit in the interior. Up north, above the Arctic Circle, the sun doesn't rise for 2 months straight. That's over 60 days of darkness where life slows to a crawl. It's not an easy place to call home, and that's a big part of why the population stays low. The terrain doesn't make it any easier. In the summer, permafrost thaws just enough to turn solid ground into muddy bogs. Tough for building, tougher for moving around. Rivers crisscross the state, freezing in winter and flooding in spring. The Brooks Range splits Alaska in two, a natural barrier no highway crosses. And along the edges, glaciers carve out the land, moving slow but steady, shaping valleys and coastlines over centuries. Speaking of coasts, Alaska's got over 6,600 miles of shoreline, more than the rest of the U.S. combined. The Bering Sea to the west can freeze over, while the Gulf of Alaska churns with storms that make travel tricky. With just 1.3 people per square mile, compared to over 90 in the lower 48, space isn't the issue. Access is. Most of the state's cut off from easy roads or ports. Summer flips the script. The sun barely sets, up to 20 hours of daylight, and temperatures climb into the 70s or 80s. But it's not all calm. Mosquitoes come out in droves, some say billions, turning quiet hikes into a battle. Wildfires spark in the dry interior, burning millions of acres in a bad year. And that thawing permafrost, it shifts the ground under homes and roads, keeping infrastructure on edge. Getting around is no picnic either. Alaska's got just over 2,000 miles of paved roads. Tiny for a state this size. Most places rely on planes, boats, or snow machines to connect. Villages dot the map, often miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by mountains, sea, or forest. It's a setup that keeps communities small and scattered, about 730,000 people total, with half in Anchorage alone. So yeah, the land's a challenge. It's too big, too rugged, too extreme for most. But that's not the whole story. People have come here, chasing gold, oil, a fresh start. They've faced the cold, the distance, the wild. Some stuck around, some didn't. Alaska's geography sets the stage, but it's the choices people make that fill in the blanks. So what brought them here, and what sent them running? Let's step back and see how history played out on this untamed land. Boom, bust, and beyond. Alaska's land might push people away, but that hasn't stopped them from trying. Over a century ago, something pulled thousands here. Gold. In 1896, the Klondike Gold Rush kicked off just over the border in Canada, but Alaska felt the wave. By 1898, places like Skagway turned into chaos. 30,000 prospectors poured in, chasing flakes in the streams. Boomtowns popped up overnight. Saloons, tents, muddy streets packed with dreamers. But it didn't last. The gold was hard to find and harder to keep. Harsh winters froze supplies. Summers drowned trails in mud. Most of those 30,000? They left, broke, cold, and empty-handed. Skagway's population crashed from thousands to a few hundred. Ghost towns like Daya faded into the forest, leaving rotting cabins and rusted pans. Alaska had its first taste of a boom, and its first bust. Fast forward to the 20th century. The land stayed quiet for decades. Fishing villages, native communities, a few hardy settlers. Then, in 1968, everything changed again. Oil struck at Prudhoe Bay, billions of barrels locked under the North Slope. By the 1970s, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was greenlit, an 800-mile lifeline pumping black gold south. Workers flooded in. Construction crews, engineers, roughnecks. Anchorage swelled. New roads stretched out. At its peak, the oil boom pushed Alaska's population past 400,000, doubling in 20 years. Jobs paid big. Pipeline workers could pull six figures in today's money. The state even started the Permanent Fund in '76, banking oil cash to pay every resident a yearly check. In 1980, it hit 550,000 people, a high point. Alaska wasn't empty anymore. It was buzzing. But booms don't stick here. Oil prices crashed in the 80s. Jobs dried up. Rigs went quiet. People who came for the paycheck packed up. Some say 10,000 left in a single year. The pipeline kept pumping, but the rush was over. Population growth flatlined, hovering around where it is now, 730,000. Those ghost towns from the gold days? They got company. Abandoned trailers and rusting gear dot the North Slope still. It's a pattern. People show up when there's something to take. Gold, oil, a quick fortune. But Alaska doesn't make it easy to stay. The land's too big, the winter's too long, the payoff too fleeting. Census numbers tell the story. After each spike, there's a drop. In 1900, post-gold rush, it was 63,000. Post-oil peak in 1990, it barely budged for decades. The state pulls you in, then spits you out. And it's not just the big rushes. World War II saw bases built. Thousands of soldiers stationed against a Japanese threat. When the war ended, most shipped out. The Cold War brought radar sites, those faded too. Each wave leaves traces, empty barracks, old mining camps, but not people. Today, you can hike to places like Kennecott, a copper town once home to 1,200, now a silent shell. So what's the deal? Alaska's got resources, gold, oil, fish, timber, but they're tied to cycles. When the good times roll, people brave the cold in the distance. When they stop, the land wins. Half the state's population clusters in Anchorage, where life's a little softer. Out there, beyond the city, it's still the same wild stretch. Beautiful, brutal, and mostly alone. History shows Alaska's never been empty by choice. It's just hard to hold on to. People come with big plans, but the state has its own rhythm. And that's where we are now. 730,000 hanging on, while the rest of those 660,000 square miles stay wide open. So how do folks live here today? What keeps them, or drives them off? Let's see what Alaska looks like in the present. Today, Alaska's population sits at about 730,000, just over half of them packed into Anchorage. That leaves 660,000 square miles feeling pretty quiet. So what's it like to live here now? For starters, it's not cheap. A gallon of milk can hit $8 in remote spots. Everything's shipped or flown in. Fuel's double, sometimes triple what you'd pay in the lower 48. Living on the edge of America comes with a price tag. Then there's the isolation. Outside Anchorage, towns shrink fast. Take Barrow, now Utqiagvik, up on the Arctic coast. 4,500 people, no roads in or out. You fly, boat, or wait for the ice to carry you. Across the state, 17% of Alaskans live rural, some in villages of 200 or less, cut off by mountains or sea. You're not just far from neighbors, you're far from everything. That distance shapes daily life. Many rely on subsistence, hunting moose, fishing salmon, picking berries, to keep food on the table. In 2022, over 36 million pounds of wild game were harvested. It's not just tradition, it's survival. Roads don't reach most places, only 2,000 paved miles total, so bush planes and snowmobiles are lifelines. If you need a doctor or a store, it's a trip, sometimes hours. But it's not all hardship. There's a flip side. Alaska's got a pull. Space, quiet, a chance to live off the grid. Some come for that. Homesteaders build cabins deep in the woods. Others chase the wild beauty. Glaciers, bears, the aurora lighting up the sky. The state hands out a bonus too, the Permanent Fund dividend. Last year, every resident got $3,284 courtesy of oil money. It's a perk not many places offer. Still, the challenges stack up. Winter's brutal, dark and cold for months. Summer's short, and even then you're battling mosquitoes or dodging floods from thawing permafrost. Jobs can be scarce outside cities. Fishing, tourism, oil if you're lucky. For every person who stays, another leaves. In 2020, more people moved out than in first net loss in years. The population's barely budged since the 90s. Take a place like McCarthy. Population 100, nestled near an old copper mine. No grocery store, no hospital, just a dirt road in. Or Bethel, 6,000 strong but 400 miles from Anchorage by air. These spots show the split. Half the state's urban, half's spread thin. Anchorage feels like any city. Malls, traffic, Starbucks. Step outside and it's a different world. Empty, wild, untouched. So why is Alaska still so empty? It's not a mystery, really. The land's tough, the costs are high, and the lifestyle's not for everyone. Most of America's wired tight. Roads, towns, people stacked close. Here, you've got 1.3 people per square mile. A speck in a sea of space. Some love that. Others can't handle it. Alaska's present is a balance between those who stay and the land that keeps most away. So, what's it all mean? Let's wrap this up and find out. The hidden truth. So, what's hiding in America's emptiest state? It's not one big secret, it's a mix of truths we've seen along the way. Alaska's 660,000 square miles are a giant canvas. Mountains, tundra, glaciers that don't give up space easily. Winters lock it down, summers throw curveballs, and the sheer scale keeps most of it out of reach. With just 730,000 people, it's less than 1 per square mile. That's not empty by accident, it's by design. History backs that up. Gold and oil brought rushes, thousands chasing a payout. But when the shine faded, so did the crowds. Boomtowns turned ghost towns. Oil rigs rusted out. People come when there's something to grab, but staying? That's another story. Today, half live in Anchorage, where life's manageable. The rest scatter across a land that's gorgeous but unforgiving. High costs, isolation, a rhythm most can't match. Yet there's a flip side. For some, Alaska's emptiness is the draw. Room to breathe, hunt, watch the northern lights dance. It's not a void, it's a choice. The state's not hiding a mystery to solve, it's hiding a reality. This is a place for the few who can take it. A frontier that's still wild, still vast, still calling to those who hear it. Alaska's not empty. It's just different, and maybe that's the real truth worth finding. While this land accommodates some, it pushes others out away from its borders. So here's the question for you. Could you live here, even if it meant being paid extra $25,000 per year to do so? Or would it push you out too?